Hello everyone, thanks so much for joining us to discuss writing with academic integrity as part of the Academic Integrity Awareness Week. I have joining with me my colleague Gillian, who will be on chat, and Candida, who will be helping with the technical issues behind the scenes. Please note that this webinar is being recorded. We will be sending the recording to all the participants after the webinar via email. Please use the chat function to pose your questions or make any comments. If you do not wish these to be recorded, please do contact us and let us know, and we can remove it from the recording. Before we make a start, we would like to acknowledge and celebrate the Ngunnawal people on whose traditional lands we meet today, and pay our respect to elders past and present. So my name is Twee. I'm a learning advisor at Academic Skills, and I'm very delighted to be having Dr. Kelly Gurun join us from Research and Development. So this is a joint webinar, and we are also very fortunate to have joining us from the various colleges, Dr. Julia Alliard and Professor Bruce Smythe and Professor Steve Blackburn. Kelly, could I ask you to introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you, Twee, and hello everybody. So I'm Kelly Guerin from the Research and Development Unit. So my job is mostly working with HDRs and PhD candidates to develop their skills in all sorts of aspects of doing research. And I also work with the supervisor development team so that I get a chance to talk to both supervisors and PhD candidates about their work.
Thanks, Kelly. Bruce? You got to unmute yourself.
I'm on mute, there we go. I'm Bruce Smythe. I frequently don't unmute myself on these things. I work for the Centre for Social Research and Methods. I'm on the ANU full HREC, the Human Research Ethics Committee, and I've been a methodologist for about the last 25 years.
Thanks, Bruce. Julia?
Thanks, Twee. So I'm Julia Alliard. I am in the College of Health and Medicine. So I'm a researcher in the John Curtin School of Medical Research and a lecturer in third year biology subjects. And I'm also the Associate Dean for Teaching and Learning in the College of Health and Medicine.
Thanks, Jules. Steve?
Yeah, g'day, I'm Steve Blackburn. Thanks, Twee. I'm in the College of Engineering Computer Science. For the last 10 years, I've taught one of the big introductory computer science classes, which has been a lot of fun. I really enjoy teaching. I'm a researcher in programming languages. And at the moment, I'm interim associate director for education in the School of Computer Science.
Thank you. So today is really an opportunity for us to hear from our academic panelists, so from Steve, Jules, and Bruce, about why it is important to produce work with academic integrity within the disciplines, and where the students in their fields and disciplines trip up. We will also be hearing from them some tips and strategies for how you can write and produce work with academic integrity. We'd also love to hear from you, our participants, so coursework and research students, about what you find challenging about writing with academic integrity. Kelly from Research Development is going to be talking to us about the common problems of patchwriting. What is it? Why is it a problem? And how best to avoid it and to develop your thorough voice. We hope to be able to provide you today with some tips and strategies for how you can write with academic integrity. Okay, so let's start by, I'm going to pose this question to our academic panelists. Why is it important to produce work with academic integrity, including write with academic integrity? Bruce, would you like to start? You got to unmute yourself, Bruce.
I might just stay unmuted for this whole session. I think it's just working too hard and too long hours. In academia, reputation is everything. And sadly, when people don't do the right thing, you tend to not read their work, you tend not to cite them, and basically it's not good for your career. And if you're a student, it's not very good for you either. And I think one of the hard things for me in this area with students is the difficult conversations we have along the way or at the end of courses when we've detected something that's not good academic practice, and basically have to sit down with students and work our way through the formal process. And others might like to pick up on that.
Thanks, Bruce. Jules, would you like to go next?
Yeah, so I would echo that academia is about ideas, and that knowledge is built really slowly. So it's really important that you acknowledge those that have contributed and the different contributions that they have made to the field. That's something that we all have to do as academic writers, and that includes all the academic panel, sitting here today. I also think that one thing why it's important is because it's important for the reader to understand what is your contribution and what is your thoughts and what are those of somebody else's. And so that needs to be really transparent, because otherwise, if it's not, you may think that they are thinking that this is all your work, but they might actually be thinking that none of it is your work. And so if you can clearly distinguish what is the work of others, then it makes it clearer what is your own thoughts.
Great, thanks so much. Steve, would you like to add to those?
Yeah, both those points are great ones. I would add that there's something you carry away with, you take away from the ANU when you leave, when you graduate, and employers will actually value hiring someone with integrity. So learning about these principles at this stage as a student, whether it be a graduate student or an undergraduate, is incredibly valuable. And certainly I know the large tech companies that I've worked with, they take this very seriously. They take integrity very seriously, and they take ethics seriously. And knowing that you've come from a place that instills you with core ideas of integrity is something that they actually look for. So that's another thing that you can take away from this, aside from the immediate elements that are obvious, that when you're actually a student, it's very, very important to act with integrity. It's also something you take away as a positive.
Right, thanks so much for sharing your ideas. Kelly?
Yes, I'd echo all of the things that the others have said, and also to take it from the perspective of researcher development. One of the things that ANU prides itself on is producing researchers who have integrity, so that people outside can actually believe what we tell them, so that it gives us our work a robustness that means that it can be trusted. So when it comes to the actual writing, understanding how to do this appropriately becomes really important, partly to for those of you who are doing work that's going to be assessed either by external examiners or internal examiners. One of the things they're looking for is to know that you do actually understand the field, that you've read widely in the area, and that you've thought about how all of that work fits together and what you see as important and what you see as true, perhaps, and that you understand the work that's going on in your field. So that's one of the criteria for the PhD assessment. But what's really important when it comes to research is that we know these ideas don't come from just anywhere. Always what we're doing is building on the existing knowledge in the area. So we need to demonstrate that we understand how our own work comes from the research that other people have done, that it builds on the ideas that others have developed. And then the next bit, to demonstrate your original contribution to knowledge in the field, is to be able to distinguish which parts are your own ideas and your own contributions, and how you're using other people's work. So this is a really important part of the skill development, is being able to write with the appropriate authorial voice as a researcher.
Thanks, Kelly. Yeah, I totally agree with all of that, and all of what our academic panelists have shared with us. Certainly in practice, writing with academic integrity means that you need to be able to integrate other people's ideas into your work, not only appropriately, but also by providing a citation. It means that it's important to make it clear to your reader, as Kelly and others have said, whose words it is and whose ideas it is. And when you are integrating, you need to be able to write it in your own words. So summarizing, paraphrasing correctly and appropriately. And it's important for us to be able to, and your markers to be able to see where you stand on these issues. So you've done all the great research and you've surveyed the various perspectives and the different findings of the various studies, but you need to be able to stand back and make a judgment as to the value of the contribution of others. So what your markers and what your certainly lecturers and tutors want to see is you be able to take a position and to show your commitment to your position and ideas by making an evaluation and a judgment about the value of other people's work, and demonstrating that through the way in which you use language to show your stance. So are you agreeing with someone's ideas or disagreeing, or can you see some gaps in their work? So how are you developing your voice vis-a-vis others? And so when it comes to writing and drawing on other people's work to build your own analysis and ideas, you'll be mainly summarizing and paraphrasing and quoting and synthesizing from your sources. So these are the main ways in which you can legitimately incorporate sources into your writing to demonstrate and show the readers that you have indeed done wonderful research and that you can critically apply their research to your work and to develop arguments and analysis. So in terms of when we write academically, we write in terms of paragraphs, and here's a typical paragraph whereby you can see the integration of others' ideas and work into this paragraph. At the topic sentence level, you see that the students certainly stating their argument, their key idea, the key point for the paragraph, and here summarizing and paraphrasing and synthesizing, as well as selectively quoting from the source. And quoting from the sources is appropriate for depending on your disciplines. But yes, this is a typical paragraph, and this is what you'll be trying to achieve when it comes to writing for your assignments. And we should be able to distinguish as readers when it is your analysis, your voice, versus when it is other people's ideas in your work. And you can see here the use of citations to do so. So now we want to hear from you, so our students. I'm just going to now share with you our Minty meetup, which now has sort of disappeared. Sorry, I'm just going to stop share for a minute and find my... Okay, share screen. So if you could please go to www.minty.com and use the code. We'd love to hear from you. Why is it hard to avoid plagiarism? So we know that you know what plagiarism is. and why it's important to avoid plagiarism. But we also know that it still occurs. So why is it so hard to avoid plagiarism? What is it that you find challenging about writing with academic integrity? Yeah, too many assignments due at once. That's quite a common challenge. The lack of time. A lot of students have expressed lack of confidence in their own ideas, particularly when they're being introduced to the ideas of key scholars in the area who are, who spent years honing their ideas and researching. And it's hard to sometimes capture their ideas in your own words. So we've also got, thank you, this is great. So difficulties with language and confidence with expressing yourself in English. That's certainly a challenge for a lot of our students. And I think it's not just if English is a second or third language, but certainly students in general can sometimes find it very difficult to express their ideas in their own words and have their confidence in their own judgments and ideas. Yeah, hard to keep track of references and sources. So hopefully you've got a systematic approach for reading and note-taking to do with paraphrasing. Yeah, the paraphrasing process is challenging and it can take several attempts to get it right. And that's the thing, is that it does take time to paraphrase, but having a systematic approach is going to help you to paraphrase accurately and appropriately. Yeah, paid services. We do know that students are tempted to use the services, paid services, or even non-paid services to do their work for them, and that would be in a breach of academic integrity, and certainly paid services are illegal service. So the federal government has made it illegal. So if you do engage with those services, you'll be engaging with an illegal business. And of course, there are going to be some severe consequences for that. Difficult to synthesize, decades of scholarship. That's right. And synthesizing is a very important skill, but it is difficult because it involves drawing on multiple sources and being able to see the relationship between your sources, so where there are similarities and differences. Bad memory. Yeah, it's not good to rely on your memory. So this is why it's so important to take notes. And to have a way to store it and retrieve it. So if you use a referencing tool, for instance, that'll be like EndNote, Zotero, Mendeley. There might be others that you find useful. Yeah, putting things into your own words. So difficult to come up with your own ideas. And that's the thing, is that when we say we want you to produce work with originality, we want to hear your original ideas. What do we mean by that? Jules, Steve, or Bruce, or Kelly, would you like to jump in there?
What do you mean?
The issue of coming up with their own ideas and original ideas, and sometimes it's very hard for students to, as one says here, it's difficult to come up with their own ideas and coming into a well-established idea or field. In a well-established field. So what are your suggestions for students there?
So I think it does come down to confidence. So yeah, it can be really difficult for students to judge their analysis of other people's ideas and whether they're on the right wavelength or not. Yeah.
It's certainly something that develops over time. The more you get to know the field, the more confident you do become in your own ideas. But also, one of the really important starting points is just demonstrating that you understand how all the ideas are connected. So which points of view tend to come up in the around a particular topic, who's in alliance with each other, who's presenting something different. So I don't think you have to come up with something original immediately, but part of what we're trying to do here is to demonstrate that we understand what's already happening in the field, and that can seem like a less challenging task at the beginning, and then the more you know, the you become a better critical thinker the more you know about the field. And to start with, you're just trying to show that you understand what's out there already.
Yes, great. Thank you so much. Now I'm going to pose a question to our academic panelists. Not that one, but from your experience working with students and I guess marking students' work, where do you find that students in your disciplines trip up and why?
So I might start with that, Twee, thanks. So being in the science discipline, I see that a lot of students, both those whose English is their first language and those whose a second or third language, can often struggle to understand the particular scientific or academic language that is used within the source. So we see this often, particularly papers, scientific papers that are that they might be quoting or using as a source in their work. They don't understand exactly what is the meaning of the different words, and so rather than they find it very difficult to to paraphrase, and they end up just stringing parts together, large chunks together, and not rephrasing it into their own words to connect different ideas. I also think that cultural factors and things can be at play. So we know if students come to university and their secondary education has been focused a lot on rote learning, that they may not understand as well what constitutes plagiarism and what is acceptable academic practice when it comes to writing. They don't see it as an issue of stealing ideas or work, but as rather it's seen as being a good thing, I think, in a way to sort of, yeah, I can't find the right words for it, but yeah.
So showing the respect to
yeah, in a way it's showing
scholars.
respect of the scholars, and it's just viewed differently.
Thank you, Jules. Bruce or Steve?
Steve, do you want to go next, buddy?
Sure. Yeah, there are a multitude of issues, and I think it does differ a little across disciplines. So in computer science and engineering, and also mathematics, and other disciplines, you may be the problems that students are being asked to solve may have at the heart more a creative dimension rather than a synthesis element. So rather than synthesizing from prior work, you're asked to come up with an approach. For example, how do you solve this problem? And that's really a creative question rather than something you're going to apply rote learning to, or you're going to look at the literature to how do I solve this exact problem, because it's a problem no one's seen before. So then the question is, if you're doing that and you're allowed to talk to your classmates, which in most courses you're often encouraged, in fact, the question is, what is okay to discuss with your classmates and what isn't? In terms of the question on the slide here, I think that's one area where I've seen students trip up. So they have a conversation with their classmates about a topic relating to the assignment, but where do they cross the boundary between what's acceptable and what's not acceptable? Because when you are doing something that's fundamentally creative, if you merely share the insight of your creative idea with another person, you've kind of given the game away to some extent. And it's like you can imagine someone in the fine arts, if they displayed the thing that they've created to another person, it's going to be very hard for the other person to unsee what they just saw and to not have that be implicitly part of their solution. So this is a tricky question, and the way I often answer it to students who ask this question, because it's a common question, is I say to them, look, in terms of that conversation you're having with your classmates, think about it this way. Would you be comfortable having that conversation on the class forum? Would you be comfortable having the lecturer and all the teaching assistants participate in that conversation? Because if you wouldn't be comfortable raising it in that context, then it's probably not okay. And I think a lot of students find that tip helpful because it helps them. They can kind of think it through and say, okay, am I crossing the line here with this conversation I'm having with my friend in the library? And they can answer it concretely by going through that scenario.
Right, thanks, Steve. Yeah, it is very different for some of your students in KEX in relation to also coding their work. Bruce?
Yeah, a couple of things
What do you
here.
find?
Yeah. So, first of all, can I just say it's not hard to spot when people have not had good academic practice because the tone and the rhythm of writing changes. You just jump on Google, you put a phrase in, and up it pops, or a half a page of Wikipedia, up it pops. And most academics, when they're examining things or reading things, check the reference list first to just get a feel for where people are coming from. Related to that is when people are in my office crying at the end of the year, normally the waterworks are about two things. One is not enough time, or people say, I thought I could get away with it. And I have to say, like, here's a confession. About 25 years ago, I plagiarized. I'd call it poor academic practice. But I read a couple of hundred articles. I had stuff all over my lounge floor. And someone said this phrase, rare, brief, and minimal. And I used it. And I thought, that's okay, I'll find it. I could never find it again. But I used it. And to this day, 25 years on, it haunts me because someone's going to come along and find it and say, hey, that was mine. The reality is for most academics, well, certainly for me, I get a big idea about once every 5 to 10 years. So it kind of means a lot to me. So if someone comes along and takes it or scoops it, it really hurts. So related to that, I've actually been plagiarized. I've had someone very senior in my field heard me speak at a conference and took my paper that I'd handed out at the conference and rewrote it better than me and then published it. And I just happened to find it on Google one day and went, hold on, went back to the journal, went back to the editor, gave them an A and B comparison of what I'd said and what this other person had said. The article got pulled from the journal. And the response I got from the journal when they did an investigation was, this academic said they submitted the wrong version of the paper to the journal, which any academic would know that's complete rubbish, because at what point do you actually lose all of your attributions, your quote marks, and your page numbers? So the impact of that on me was just horrendous. I don't think I could sleep for a week. I was so angry about it. And it still bugs me today. And I haven't met that academic, but one day I will, and one day we'll have a discussion. So, it's just not a good look to kind of do these things. And I know generally people, it's poor academic practice. The other thing I want to say too is English, where English is not the first language, I would always rather prefer to read clunky sentences, knowing that, than have a student come along and try and take slabs of bits and pieces everywhere and not make the attribution, so I can't tell whose work it is. So those are my thoughts on this tricky issue.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and experiences with us there, Bruce. It doesn't seem, it's not a very nice experience to have gone through, but yeah, thank you. Kelly, from your own work with, I guess, students in research students, do you see any issues?
I see the accidental plagiarism, and that I think that's one of the things that is really disturbing, because I think it's very rare for somebody to deliberately try to cheat, especially at doctoral level, because we are actually really interested in the ideas and the work and learning. So that it's more when people slip into situations where they've forgotten where the writing came from or where the ideas came from. And I think that I find that really, really kind of tragic in a way, because here are people who really are very clever, do know a lot, and to be then to feel like people have regarded them as untrustworthy is really incredibly damaging to their reputation. I think, Steve, you had something else to say. You had your hand up a moment ago.
Yeah, I had two things. One was just following on from what you said, and the other one was something that someone asked me in the chat. The follow-on from what you're saying is that I think, in my experience, at the undergraduate introductory computer science class level, there unfortunately is a lot of egregious copying. or plagiarism, academic misconduct. When I say a lot, I'm not that much, but once you've got a class of 500, the numbers begin to get fairly large. But my experience is most of that, and it's been mentioned before by someone else, most often that comes from a stress situation where the individual involved has found themselves, they felt that they're painted into a corner. They felt that they've got to deliver something, they've run out of time, and they don't know how to do it. And they reach for this mechanism of borrowing from someone else or paying someone to do it for them, which of course is a disastrous response to that situation. So what I try to do in my intro classes is try to help people guard against that by staging things, try to help them learn how to manage their time well, and remind them that solution is not a solution at all. It's a disastrous route to go down. But I just wanted to point out that certainly intro at a doctoral level, yeah, absolutely, it's rather extraordinary to find anyone who would do anything like that intentionally. But unfortunately, at the undergraduate level, it does happen, and in my experience, it's mostly around people responding poorly to stress. And one way to mitigate that is to A, be aware of the rules, B, be aware of the consequences, and C, plan and have things in perspective. So the other question I was just going to mention, which came up in the chat, was there was a question about using GitHub. Some of you will have heard of GitHub. It's a place where people put source code, and it's very, very important in computer science, not just computer science these days, in the sciences. A lot of people use computing to do work in the sciences, even in the social sciences. People are using computer science to do their work, and they put their code that addresses the problems into GitHub, which is an open public platform for source code. And there's absolutely no problem with using most of the code there, as long as you use it appropriately according to the license agreement that's posted with the code. But if you're a student writing an assignment, say in computer science or in the sciences, where you might be using computers to solve the problem, you generally may be able to use those depending on what your lecturer has said, but you have to attribute it. Just like when you're writing prose, you have to attribute that source. So if you're using code that came from GitHub, you attribute it. Just like if you picked something up off Wikipedia or a book or wherever it might have been, you have to attribute the source. So the question, I think, was, is it okay to use things off GitHub? GitHub's not very much different to using things from the library or anywhere else. It just, you'll need to check with your lecturer. If it's an undergraduate subject, you need to understand whether or not this particular assessment allows that. Very often it will. And when you do it, you have to reference it.
Right, thanks for those tips, Steve. So yeah, we certainly, from an academic skills point of view, the work that we do see these common mistakes. And it always alarms me when we have submissions and the students makes a little note at the front saying, haven't had a chance to reference yet, I'll put in them later. And I think it comes back to what Bruce was saying, is that if you don't have a systematic approach, if you don't reference as you go, you're going to make some mistakes. And certainly we see students storing on other people's work without providing a citation or leaving out a citation. And they can be, a simple, honest mistake, but it's best to avoid making these mistakes. We also see it when there are incomplete or missing quote marks, and when students use words without appropriate acknowledgement. When it comes to paraphrasing and summarising, we do certainly see poor practices there, whereby students make very minor changes. So just use synonyms, so replacing words, but keeping most of the other wording and not really changing the sentence structure when they're paraphrasing and summarising from other people's ideas. And certainly another common mistake is when it's not clear to readers whether it's your ideas or the ideas of others. So when you're summarising, paraphrasing from others and synthesising, versus when you're injecting your own analysis. So we don't want to see ambiguity of voice. It's important that it is clear when you are developing your own voice and drawing on other people's voices.
So one of the things that we do see a lot in research writing and so this applies to all different kinds of essays in different disciplines, is this idea of patchwriting. I find this a really useful concept for talking to student writers. It's the idea that people take all their notes and then try to copy from their source text, delete a few words, change the sentences around a little bit, or change some of the words, as Twee was explaining just then. But the thing is that what happens here is that people take a whole lot of notes and then they try to include absolutely everything they've read and stitch together all these little bits and pieces that they've picked up from reading a whole lot of different sources. And the problem then is that they're stitching together little bits of other people's work, but it doesn't have a strong sense of what the author is actually trying to say. So I think this is one of the things that is really important to start having a slightly different approach to, that it's not just stitching together. You're not trying to make an account of everything you happen to have read that's vaguely related to this topic. I see this at doctoral level, but I think it's a practice that gets started probably at high school for a lot of people, and then they keep doing the same kinds of things instead of understanding that something different is required at university level. So I'll pass. So what really goes wrong here then is that you don't get a sense of what the student writer is contributing to the discussion. First of all, it often sounds pretty jumbled, so that there isn't a really clear argument being presented because it's trying to patch together all these little bits and pieces. But we also don't get a clear sense of the author that is trying to deliver a particular message of their idea about what all of this means, what all this information is about.
So how can you avoid patch writing? So our tip is a good start would be to adopt a systematic approach to help you to then paraphrase and summarize with integrity. Always have a purpose for which you're reading, so that then you are asking questions of the text you're reading, you're looking for relevant information, but you're also trying to understand what others are saying. And then it's important to try and pull out some key ideas. And as you're doing that, when you're taking notes, you're actually already starting to critically analyze those ideas and critically engage with them, so that then you're going to be writing in your own words already. You're starting to pull out some key ideas and put it in your own words. And then based on your notes, you can then try and write your paraphrases and summaries and trying to change the wording and the order. So, but you may wish to keep some technical language there. It's usually students who miss the important middle part, so the step of taking notes, that then they encounter problems. So certainly, if you're paraphrasing from a text, it's better to try and pull out those key ideas, so you are testing your own understanding of those ideas, but also what the significance of those ideas. And as I was saying before, in doing that, you're already starting to write in your own words. It's then important to put away your notes and the original text and not look at them and trying to paraphrase in your own words. So try and capture the essence of someone else's ideas. So keeping the meaning of their ideas, but changing the word and sentence structure. So if you need to, look at your notes, but it's best to try and do it without them. And it may require you to paraphrase a couple of times, so several attempts before you get it right. And then yes, it's always good to go back to the original and see if you've done it correctly. So it's important that you move away from paraphrasing and summarizing to synthesizing multiple texts. This is a higher order level of skills, and certainly it is more difficult to do because you are working with multiple texts, trying to identify what they have in common, So they might be posing similar arguments or have similar findings, or where they're different, etc. By grouping those studies, then you will be able to see, in terms of literature, what we know and what we don't know. So what do we know about this topic or issue, and where there are perhaps gaps. And that's when you can also add your originality too, because through synthesizing the text, through the way in which you able to draw together multiple sources, and the way that you categorize those sources, and the way that you identify key themes and key issues, and develop a coherent narrative around those, that's when you're injecting your own creativity, originality. You're demonstrating that you're starting to see things from a particular perspective, and you're certainly critically engaging with those texts. So very important for you to, if you wish to avoid plagiarism, to move towards synthesizing texts, because synthesizing text will allow you to do to develop your voice, as Callie has been talking about too.
So when it comes to actually writing the piece that is your own take on what it is that you've been reading about, one of the things that I would always encourage my students to do is to put everything aside, because you do actually know quite a lot about the topic once you've done all of that reading, making all those notes, paraphrasing, trying to put all the ideas together as Twee's explained. But the point is, for anything that's going to be either for assessment or for publication, everybody else has done the same reading too. And what we really want to know is what you think about it. So what I would recommend always to my candidates is to put away all that stuff that you've been working on. If you start writing something with all those things in front of you, that's why you're trying to stitch all the bits and pieces together. But instead, put that away, and instead start with your own understanding of the topic. So start to make notes about what you want to include in that piece of writing, sort out the order of the key ideas, and kind of trust yourself in a way in terms of your own understanding. This is only the very beginning of it, of course, but if you try to start by just mapping out the skeleton of the piece of writing that you're trying to work on, you might have some brief references in that original skeleton, but once you've got the key headings of the story, go back and fill in the dot points, what you can remember, what you know about it, what you thought was important, how things fit together. And then once you've got quite a detailed plan, then go back and fill in all the sources, put in the detailed citations and references, check the details of the statistics or the numbers or the wording of an argument or something. You know that none of those ideas are original. You know that you've been reading about this. For the PhD candidates, you've been reading about it for months some of the time. But I think if you do start with your own understanding and then fill in the details and the citations, you'll end up with something that makes a lot more sense to your readers and will have a much stronger sense of the argument that you're trying to put forward in this piece of writing. Rather than stitching together that patchwork, start from yourself. And I think that the results are usually much, much better and more appropriate. So it's not about pretending that you don't have the citations. You do have to include all of that, of course, but starting from your own understanding will get you a lot further in producing the kind of writing that we're looking for.
Thanks, Callie. And so really it's important that, as Callie was saying here, have some confidence in your own ideas and your own position. So you've done all the work, you've done all the hard work and analysis. You need to step back and say, well, where do I stand on it all? What do I make of all of this? If there are various perspectives or various theories you can draw on, which theory and which perspective and why? So it's important for you to be able to position yourself within the research, within the literature, and to be able to convey your analysis and your judgments with some conviction, some confidence in the way that you then develop your voice. So developing voice, and voice does, as Flortum says, implies stance, so having a position, and then being able to use language strategically. So the kinds of words and phrases and how you use particular words and phrases would indicate to readers your stance. So your attitude to other people's ideas, their contribution to research, the value of their work. So you can be demonstrating that you agree mostly with someone's ideas, but you can see some limitations, or you disagree and here's why. So it's really important that you learn how to use language strategically, so certain words and phrases to be able to develop writer voice and stance. And here I'd like to invite our panelists just to also provide some key tips, your own tips for the students. Jules or Bruce, would you like to start, Bruce?
Go, Jules. I can see you're ready to give us some wisdom.
No, that's fine. That's
You've got
fine.
the wisdom.
Yeah, so I think all of that, what is said about patchwriting is really important. And this is a lot of the plagiarism cases that I see in the sciences come from this, and they arise from poor note-taking and stress. So what happens is that students have perhaps a non-ideal, some might call it lazy, approach to taking notes where they cut and paste things from different sources. And they do this at a time when they're not really stressed, and the fact that they do it then also means that they don't really think about what it is. They just see a bit of what they think is evidence and say, I'll take that. And they're collecting evidence without actually thinking how it comes together. But they see that as a shortcut, but it's not a shortcut because what happens is that when it comes to writing their actual essay or lab report or whatever it is, that they forget what they've cut and pasted and what notes they've taken from themselves, and sometimes they assume that they were all their own notes, or they don't have time because they're stressed to rephrase and paraphrase at that point, and that's when they get into issues of copying large sections of text. So I think the two things that are really important are have key, proper note-taking processes, as has been really nicely outlined here today, and do that at a time when you're not stressed. So when the deadline is looming and that you are stressed, then at least you're working off something that it is all your own work. So that would be my tips.
Thanks, Jules.
Shall I go next, Twee?
Sure, Bruce. Thank you.
Thank you. The reality is that thinking does take time, and most academics and certainly many great students of ours are walking around with their head full of ideas, percolating those ideas, trying to distill them to get them to a point where they've got strength and are really clear. And, I've been working on a range of things. I've been working on a concept around hatred for 10 years now, and I'm still thinking about it and still trying to generate some writing around it. I think critical friends and mentors, I think it'd be great if all of us could have a mentor. I've still got a couple of mentors who've been with me for 30 years now, where I can bounce ideas around and learn good habits, because I think good habits is the key. And so I think finally I'd add time management. And Twee, I know you spend a lot of time around academic skills around time management, but I think if you can get yourself into a habit of creating jumbo jet time where you can get that nice, long, slow haul to do good thinking, and this little helicopter time where you jump in and out of bits and pieces and get no work done. But if you can create good habits around how you create the space for your thinking, that's a great thing.
Thanks, Bruce. Steve, do you want to add to that, or you happy?
There's not a whole lot to add. I mean, these are great insights. I'll just reiterate the point that I made earlier. For undergraduate students in an introductory course, planning your time is crucial. And as I suggested earlier, when you make what you think is a shortcut because you're staring down a deadline, that can often be disastrous.
Thanks, Steve. Certainly, we have the Turnitin practice site, and we encourage you to upload your drafts and make it a habit of uploading your drafts before you submit the final draft in your course model sites. Turnitin can really help you to identify problems, so why not use it? You know, it can help you to certainly identify any poor paraphrasing practices, any sort of, as you can see here, it's meant to be a quote. And the student's doing the right thing by providing the quotation marks and the citation, but the quote is broken, and that's because they're substituting some words. So you can pick up on those things. There's certainly no silver bullet, but it is a helpful resource to use. Now, as others were saying, it's so important to take the time to do your work properly. Don't skip the steps, the key steps, and take the time to develop your skills here. So you've got plenty of skills, but where would you like to improve on? We've got a lot of resources and support at ANU for you to help you to develop your skills further. So please draw on those resources. Certainly it's your responsibility as students to read up on the rules and understand the consequences. But we're here to help you, and we can address any questions that you have as well. So we're just going to end now by inviting you to ask us any questions. I'm going to stop sharing and then find my Minty. So please feel free to pop your question in chat, or actually what I'm going to do is now share this slide with you. Okay. So do you have any questions or comments for us?
Tui, while they're waiting, I just thought of something else that I wanted to mention, if that's okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes,
so what I just wanted to go back to something that I mentioned at the beginning, but perhaps didn't explain that well. But what happens when students don't, that they often fall into these poor academic practices when they don't understand the source that they're using. So I would encourage students, when you're doing your research and things and developing evidence to support the writing that you're doing, is that you take that time, if you don't understand something, to talk to your classmates, talk to your tutors, demonstrators, or lecturers, to really, they can help explain it to you, and just even explaining it to them might really tell you what you do and don't know, and then that will really help you to put it into your own words and synthesize the different ideas into your writing.
Great, thanks for those tips. They're great tips there, Jules. So we've got a few questions now. If we are aware of cheating taking place, are we complicit if we don't report? That's a good one. I see Steve nodding. Steve, do you want to go?
As someone who teaches a large intro course, I see this quite a lot. So it's a great question, whoever put that question there. And it's a very, very difficult one to answer, to be honest, because if you're in that situation of observing this, you're in a very difficult place. Most courses, most academics will provide a mechanism for you calling out cheating anonymously, which you may feel a lot more comfortable with. But I think the perspective that you should take is when someone behaves like that, as you heard from Bruce earlier, the damage that cheating the toll it can take on another person can be significant. At the level of undergraduate classes, it can just mean that you're effectively pulling down someone else's grades completely unfairly. As you get to more and more senior levels, the damage can become proportionally greater. So just bear that in mind. If you see someone cheating, just remember it's not just about their bad behavior. It's about there are victims who are either explicit or implicit in that behavior, and you need to have that in mind. Having said all that, I totally understand it's a terribly difficult situation to be in, and so I have a lot of empathy for those who are in that boat. So usually academics provide an anonymous means to inform about this sort of behavior, and I see this quite often.
Great, thanks, Steve.
Well, can I jump in very quickly?
Yes,
I know
please
time's
do.
ticking away. On the issue of how do you explain complex topics, I think it's a great thing to do the taxi driver or the bus driver and try and explain what you're doing to a friend and just verbalize it, rather than trying to write it out. So I think that's a great technique. As for cheating, I see Douglas has just put on a thing around the NHMRC national statement. Being on the ethics committee, it's very clear that I think all of us have a clear responsibility to blow the whistle or to talk to colleagues when they don't behave well. I do it all the time. I get in trouble for it. But if I see colleagues behaving badly, I'll actually email them or talk to them and call them out on it, because the reputational damage, it's huge. And if people can't trust what we do, then the game's over. As for reading foreign articles, I've got one student who spent 4 years learning another language so she could write her honours thesis in that language, and is now looking at how women keep themselves safe in conflict zones. She's learned Arabic and she's reading all the ISIS propaganda, which is an amazing lit review for a PhD when you've got that power. I've got another student who's doing some field work in Japan. He's learning Japanese. I'm not saying go out and learn a new language, but it's incredible when you see these PhD students on steroids at ANU doing this amazing work. That's my contribution.
Thanks, Bruce. Kelly?
All right. There's so much more to say. I've got to go and teach in another session now, everybody. So I've got to jump off. I can see people coming up in my other...
Yeah, thank you so much for your time, Kelly. Really appreciate it.
It's been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much, everybody, for your contributions and all the contributions in the chat as well. That's been really interesting. There are so many questions here. I'd love to be able to continue the conversation, and hopefully there'll be other forums where we can continue with that. So I'll have to head off. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Kelly. Bye. So Steve, Bruce, and Jules, are you happy to answer some of these other questions?
Yeah. Yep. I can. I might take, so that Bruce has touched on it about complex theories, but there's a similar question there, Twee, about is it harder to write in your own words and develop your own voice in a technical discipline? And what I would say is writing in the sciences, often you are citing, experimental evidence and data that other people have put forward. And so it can be a bit of a trap, because around the scientific language that's involved, but also accurately representing what are the findings of others. And I know that students sometimes do find that really difficult. So what I would encourage them to do is to really think about, when you're writing it, what is your point, and what of that evidence actually strengthens your point, and just have a few goes at rephrasing and paraphrasing that information, and linking different people's ideas together. But maybe if you're not sure if it's right, then just ask for advice. That's what people are there for. So
yeah, that's so important to think about their own ideas and what the key point they want to make. That's right.
Yeah, I think that's really key. Is to think about how is this supporting your argument or the extra data that you are putting forward, and just make sure that you attribute it at the end. I mean, in science writing, it's quite often to have there's a lot of not quotes, but you're referencing ideas, and that is the data and the evidence in almost every sentence, and that's fine. But you really need to try and put it into your own words.
Yeah, and certainly if students start from the basis of what their key point or argument is, then it's going to help them to write more concisely in the way that they bring in the evidence from the literature. so that they're only focusing on what's most relevant for supporting their ideas. Yeah, thanks for that, Jules. Steve, was there any question? Do you want to answer that question about the technical disciplines as well?
Oh, yeah, just two very quick follow-ups. Just like Jules said, this does happen in technical areas, and it can be challenging. However, my experience is that synthesis, that is taking a whole of technical work and describing your own words, can itself be of great value. And so learning to do that well is actually a really important skill. And some of the work I'm proudest of is actually relating to synthesis. So taking a whole lot of things people have done that are deeply technical and drawing threads that connect them and pointing out the relationships between them, which is a synthesis task, just like in the other academic fields. The other point I wanted to make, which I think has been bubbling under the surface a lot through the conversations, and that is not being afraid to ask. Just not being afraid to ask and discuss things, and not being afraid to ask your lecturer about whether this is okay or that's okay. Not being afraid to ask, is this the right way to do it, the wrong way to do it? Not being afraid to ask is this what you asked me to do, or did you mean something else? Just not being afraid to ask is actually really important. And I think some of the times when we've talked about people falling into traps, it's happened because people haven't understood or have been afraid to ask. So being prepared to ask is really an important thing.
Thank you. What do you advise students to, in terms of their process and strategies for talking about complex concepts and theories? Anyone? So in your area, when are you dealing with, because a lot of students struggle, I find, when dealing with complex theories and concepts, and they're trying to write in their own words and explain those concepts in their own ideas. Certainly my background is in international relations, and students who are new to international relations get thrown into the deep end often, and being introduced to all these theories. And we do have some textbooks that students can draw on to help them in terms of defining key concepts and theories, particularly when they're starting out. Are there things like that in your disciplines that students should be drawing on or can draw on to help them to unpack those ideas a bit more? Should they be reading not only the original source, but secondary sources, so other people's interpretations of those theory concepts?
Yeah, I think that's really great advice about secondary sources, Twee. So we often, I do it myself when I've got to go into a new area and write something on something that's come up in my research that I might not have thought about much before. The place that I start is review articles, that give you a nice summary of the field and everything that's been done. But it is what students need to remember, particularly doctoral candidates and things, is that it's really important not just to take what you read in a review at face value and actually go back and check the primary literature as well. But similarly, undergraduate students, I would advise them to start with a textbook. So start with a textbook and build out from there. And I think that when it comes to explaining those sort of complex topics, I think Bruce's advice of thinking about how you would explain it to someone, or even better, just try and explain it to somebody, and that'll quickly tell you whether you understand it or not.
I did mean go up to the bus driver or go to the taxi driver.
Okay.
I was.
You were actually. They're always up for a chat.
I'm conscious of the time. I wonder if we can answer maybe one more question. So, Steve, did you have something to say?
Yeah, just a very quick follow on from that. A very concrete thing I get my students to do is I ask them to be ready for the dean to walk into the lab and ask them what they're doing. And the dean's an engineer, not a computer scientist. And so, in other words, the point is it's an intelligent person who's on the ball but knows nothing about what you're doing. Can you explain this to them? And this is a really difficult thing to do, but it's a really good exercise. And I think it hits this on the head. And we also have every 6 months, our PhD students have to do this. And they've got to present everything in 5 minutes for an intelligent but uninformed academic audience. Learning to do that is a very important skill.
Yeah, and just providing some background context that is necessary for others to understand what you're talking about in the first place. And I guess there's some questions here about the needing to cite, do students need to cite common knowledge, and when best to quote, if it's appropriate within your disciplines? So
I think that citing common knowledge can be difficult. Yeah, so I think I would say try if you can. It would be good. Or I guess maybe it depends if you're talking about common knowledge or dogma. So in the sciences, we like to talk about the dogma, and actually I've had experiences, I remember in my PhD, of trying to find the relevant actual original piece of data on which the dogma was based, and it can be very obscure sometimes and really difficult. So there are cases where you might not be able to find that source for the dogma, but then you can probably build into your writing somewhere that it is dogma. Like you can say the dogma suggests that this, and without putting then an actual quote or source to it.
But when in doubt, should they cite if they've got a reference or source that they know where they're getting the information from? Definitely,
I think when in doubt, always reference if you've got doubt. And I often do find that when I'm reading through students, like honours students, draft theses and things like that, I end up putting a lot of reference. You need to find the reference all throughout their writing. So I'm actually requiring them to actually reference a lot more than they think they need to.
Thank you, Jules. I think this has been a very interesting conversation, but I think that we're well over time now, and I don't want to take too much of your time and others' time. So I might just stop here and certainly encourage students to continue this conversation with others and with those in your classroom, with your lecturers, with your tutors, with your peers, and come and see us if you've got further questions. So the rest of the slides, we just have further resources that you can draw on if you're interested. And we just want to say thank you so much to Callie, who had to leave to teach us another session now, but I'd like to thank our academic panelists for their generosity of time and for their contributions today. So Steve Blackburn, thank you so much. Bruce Smythe, thank you. And Julia Alyard, thank you, Jules. And I want to also say a big thank you to my colleagues. So Ben, and as well as our manager, so I should say, Tara, who've worked really hard to organise this inaugural Academic Integrity Awareness Week. And I'd like to thank Candida, Spence, and my other colleague, Gillian, who's been busy with the chats and technical support. So thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I hope you found that our discussion was helpful and interesting, and we hope that it has certainly provided some useful insights as well as tips and strategies for how you can go about writing with academic integrity. And we certainly want to support you to do the right thing. So thank you for joining us. Have a good afternoon, everyone.